So, how did Netflix become, well, Netflix? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the wild culture that powers one of the most disruptive companies on the planet. They built an entertainment empire not by adding more rules, but by basically throwing the entire rulebook out the window. It's a radical idea about freedom and responsibility, and we're going to break down exactly how they did it. Okay, so it all kicks off with this one big question that really bugged Netflix co founder Reed Hastings. Why do these amazing companies that start out so fast and innovative almost always end up becoming slow, rigid, and just buried in paperwork? It's a problem he knew all too well from personal experience. And this right here is the perfect example. His first company, Pure Software, started out great. Back in 91, it was this small, scrappy, super creative team. But as they got bigger, things got more complicated. And to stop people from making mistakes, they did what every company does. They added rules and more processes. Well, by 1997, the market changed, but Pure Software just couldn't keep up. All those rules had completely choked the creativity that made them great in the first place. So when it was time for his next big thing, Netflix, Hastings was absolutely determined not to let that happen again. He wanted to build a company that could get huge without losing that day one speed and agility. But that's the million-dollar question, right? How do you manage all that growth and chaos without a bunch of controls? Well, the answer became the absolute bedrock of the Netflix culture. It all starts with this first and honestly most important principle. You have to build a workplace of stunning colleagues. And we're not just talking about hiring good people. This is about creating what they call high talent density. The real light bulb moment came, believe it or not, from a crisis. Back in 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, and Netflix had to lay off a third of its people. Hastings was bracing for the worst, low morale, fear, the works. But the craziest thing happened, the exact opposite. The folks who were left, the absolute top performers, were suddenly more energized and happier than ever. The whole office was just buzzing with energy. And this led them to their big discovery, talent density. It's this simple idea that when you have a really high concentration of amazing people, their performance just rubs off on everyone else. It's contagious. Great people challenge each other, they learn from each other, and they just make everyone better. They realize the cost of keeping even a few so-so performers around was actually massive. And check this out. There's actual research that shows how damaging this can be. Professor Will Phelps did a study that showed if you add just one bad apple, a slacker or just a jerk, to a high-performing team, you can tank its effectiveness by 30 to 40%. That's huge. It turns out mediocrity is just as contagious as excellence. So for Netflix, the lesson was clear. Protect the team's performance by only keeping the stars. Okay, so you've built this team of absolute rock stars. What's next? Well, once you have that foundation, you can unlock the next level, something most companies only dream about. And that is a culture of radical candor. All right, picture this. There's a VP named Rose, and she's in front of like 40 of her colleagues pitching a big, risky plan. But it is not going well. People are pushing back. She's getting defensive. She's talking way too fast. She's completely losing the room. The whole meeting is about to go off the rails. And then, from the back of the room, her colleague Bianca just calls out, not in a whisper, not in a play email later, but right there in front of everyone. Rose, this isn't working. I mean, it sounds so harsh, right? But it was exactly what Rose needed to hear. She stopped, took a breath, reset, and totally saved her presentation. That right there is Netflix candor in action. But look, for this to work, you can't just have people being brutally honest all the time. You need a system. Netflix uses what they call the 4 A's. First, you have to aim to assist. The feedback has to come from a good place. Second, it's got to be actionable, real advice, not just criticism. Third, you're taught to appreciate it, even when it stings a little. And finally, and this is key, the person receiving it gets to accept or decline it. At the end of the day, you are in charge of your own growth. And this is where it all starts to pay off. Because when you have a building full of stunning, candid colleagues that you trust, you can start removing the controls. This is the real heart of the no rules rules idea, freedom and responsibility. Just take a look at this. On the left, that's your typical corporate expense policy, right? A tangled web of rules and approvals. On the right, that's the entire Netflix policy. 5 words, act in Netflix's best interest. That's it. They trust their people to use good judgment. No vacation policy, no travel policy, just the expectation that you'll do the right thing for the company.
But this freedom isn't some kind of free-for-all. It's one half of a deal. The other half is absolute responsibility. Like Hastings says, if someone abuses that freedom, you don't punish everyone by adding a new rule. No, you fire that person and you make it really clear why. That's how you protect the culture of freedom for the other 99% of people who do the right thing.
So what's the mindset that holds all this together? Well, Netflix is very, very clear on this one point. They are a team, not a family.
And that's a really powerful question to ask yourself. Think about it. A family is about unconditional love, right? You don't fire your cousin for a subpar performance at Thanksgiving dinner. But a professional sports team, that's all about excellence. Every single player is expected to be at the top of their game to help the team win championships. That's the model Netflix chose.
And here's the tool they use to enforce that model, the keeper test. It's a simple and, for a lot of people, a pretty brutal question that managers have to ask about their people all the time. If the answer is no, it doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means they're not the absolute best person for that role right now. And so, with a really generous severance, they're let go to make room for someone who is. Let's just hang on this idea for a second, because this concept of running your company like a high-performance sports team and not a cozy family is probably the most radical and challenging part of this whole philosophy.
And it's a tough one, isn't it? We're so often told that the best companies should feel like a family. But Hastings argues that for elite performers, the greatest satisfaction doesn't come from just unconditional acceptance. It comes from the absolute thrill of being surrounded by other masters of their craft, all pushing each other to be better.
Which brings us right back to the keeper test. See, it's not just a tool for letting people go. It's a tool that forces managers to constantly be thinking about building the absolute best team possible. It makes keeping someone on the team an active choice, making sure every single person is someone you would fight like hell to keep.
You know, when you boil it all down, it comes down to this really cool metaphor. Most companies are run like a symphony orchestra. The goal is to prevent mistakes, to perfectly play the music exactly as it's written. Everything is tightly controlled by the conductor. But Netflix? They want to be a jazz band. The goal there is innovation. It's improvisation. There is no sheet music. Success depends on each brilliant musician listening to the others and adapting in the moment.
And that really leaves us with the final question, doesn't it? In a world that's changing faster than ever, a world that values creativity and speed above all else, which model is really built for the future? Is it the perfectly polished but rigid symphony? Or is it the sometimes messy but brilliantly adaptive jazz band? Netflix has clearly placed its bet. What about you?